Addiction, the fact or condition of being addicted to a particular substance, thing, or activity. Hi, my name's Sherry, and this is my story. My story is different than others. I had a normal childhood. I grew up with parents who loved me. I grew up on a farm, and it was fun. I stayed with my nanny and papa a lot. But when I started school, there were people that I wanted to be friends with, and they didn't want to be friends with me. And I found myself doing stuff to have them like me. I was a people pleaser. And I learned that I was a people pleaser, and that I had codependency, and that I had an addictive spirit when I was in rehab. And when I went to counseling, I realized that my counselor pointed out that stuff, and all my life I have been a people pleaser, and I wanted to do this, and I wanted to, for people to like me, not because they wanted to like me for who I am. I wanted them to like me because I wanted to be liked by that particular person. When I was in high school, I hung around the people who were not so nice. If I was being picked on, I could pick on people, and I just hung around the certain people that liked to party, liked to drink, and I found myself drinking a lot, and I dabbled into drugs early on in my high school, and I found myself at the age of 18, went to a party, and I ended up pregnant from that party. There were things that happened to me prior to that because of the drugs and the alcohol, but I hid those from people until I went through rehab and I spoke about them, because I went to a dark spot at the age of 15, and I didn't tell anybody until later on. I have a few friends that knew something had happened to me, but I just continued on with that people pleasing, and I raised my son. I had help with my parents, and I kind of straightened up a little bit, and then years down the road, I had to have surgeries, and they did 5 surgeries in one day, and I do not recommend that. And I knew after that surgery there was something wrong, something was not right. When I went to the doctors, they were not listening to me, and I'm not blaming them. Please don't think that I'm blaming any doctors, and I don't want any judgment on the doctors, because they just weren't listening, but they were doing what they thought was best for me with the story. Like, my stomach hurt, there was something inside that I was in pain, constant pain all the time, and then I would get anxiety because I was hurting so bad, thinking I'm going to die because there's something in here that could make me die. And I had small children, and so they would prescribe me anxiety meds, and then they prescribed me more pain medicine, and it got to the point to where I wasn't in pain anymore, but I didn't realize it until I went to rehab. This is where my addiction started, and I found that I could not live without, and I would get up and go to work, and I didn't realize it then, but I would start out with taking 3 or 4 pills, pop them, just to get ready for work, and I would go to work and take the kids to school, and then it was just a never-ending cycle, and it went on for years. And then I wanted to get off of them, and I realized that I couldn't. And I was taking 164 opiates a day. And I have proof of that for those of you who are like, oh my gosh, no, I OD'd so many times that I should not even be alive. So I tried to get off of them myself, and that did not happen, because you cannot just come off of them yourself. So in my brain, I decided, okay, I can use alcohol, it will be cheaper, because I was running out of money. So when I started running out of money, I went to the streets, and I would sneak to the streets, and I got a hold of some bad drugs when it ended up in the hospital. I almost died from that. So that's when I really decided to go to the alcohol. That didn't do anything but just spiral downhill, because I could get through with a little bit of pills through the daytime, and then when I would come home, I would drink just to get by, and I hid everything from my husband and my children. My husband knew there was something, and I would just say, no, I'm fine, or I worked a very stressful job, and I would wake up in the morning sometimes and there would be glass everywhere, and I would come into the living room or something, and my kids would be, I'd say, what happened? And they're like, oh, mommy, we broke something, or you knocked something over last night. It was okay, but I don't remember. They lived through hell for a while, and I can't take that back. I can't take back things I said. I can't take back things I did. I only tried to make their life better after rehab. I remember the night that I went into rehab was February 5th, 2011. And we were going to go get my husband a boat, and I only had so many pills left. And so I tried to make it through the day, and I took them, and we went and got his boat, and we come home, and I was just, remember, I was feeling so different on the inside. Like I was just felt broken. And we decided everybody wanted to take a nap because we got up so early and we had to travel to go get the boat. And while everybody was taking a nap, I finished my last drop of alcohol, but I couldn't go to sleep. And so it was in the middle of the night, and I remember this. I don't remember much after we come home and we drank, but I remember this distinctly, and I remember the words. And the stuff that happened was I went to the bathroom and I contemplating on, this was it. Tonight is the night that I'm going to kill myself, because my husband and my children deserved someone better. They deserved a mom who was not mean, who was not addicted, who was not, they deserved a normal mother, and I was not giving that to them. So I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, you are a worthless piece of garbage, and your children deserve better. And I remember looking out the window and I said, God, if you are really there, if you are really, really up there, you will help me get through this, because if you don't help me, tonight's the night that I die. You see, I was brought up in the church, and I went to church active using, and I hid it from people. I still considered myself a Christian, but when those drugs take over your body, you don't think clearly. But I still believed. But I lost my faith when all of that stuff happened to me, and I had to reassure myself, was there really a God out there? Was there really a God that could come in and save me? I opened up that bathroom door, and I don't know how I ended up where I ended up. I vaguely remember picking up a set of keys, but I thought I dreamed it. And it wasn't a dream, because I ended up somehow, I don't remember, but obviously I drove, but I remember walking in my parents' house, and I looked at my parents, but I can remember screaming and crying, and I mean, it was, I don't know what I told them. My mother and my father sat me down, and my mom started making phone calls, and everybody that she called a counselor that went to our church who was in drug and rehab, and this lady is hardly ever home because she was busy, but she was home this particular night, and she told my parents what to do and told me what hospital to go to. And when I got to the hospital, there were people already put in place that I didn't know that were there. And I can remember walking in there, and I started feeling the effects, and I just wanted to die. people saying that you wanted to kill yourself. They put you on suicide prevention, and you talk about humbling. I was stripped of my clothes. I was put in a room with nothing. I had a paper gown and a paper blanket, and I remember this doctor coming in, and his name was Dr. Scott Van Fossen, and he told me that I am never too far from God, and God had a plan for me, and I just said, I need you to help me. I don't really know what all happened that evening. I went to sleep, and I slept off stuff, and I said, I want help, and he'd come in the next morning, and I had nurses that were checking on me all night long, and I had to sign papers that I was wanting to check myself into a rehab center. They couldn't do anything the night before because I was so intoxicated, and the next morning I felt awful, and he told me, he said he doesn't know how I was alive with as much alcohol and drugs that was in my system when they did my blood work. And that's when he told me again that God had a plan for me. So I went to rehab, and I spent time in there. In my first few days of rehab, I signed papers. I did not want any drugs to be taken off of drugs. And they're like, you don't know what you're asking us to do. And I'm like, I don't know. I signed papers. And let me tell you something. If you've ever went through detox without anything, then you will know those first 4 days were pure hell on earth. It was awful, but I remember how I felt, and I don't ever want to go back to that. And I had a nurse by my side the whole time, and I would scream at her and yell at her when I asked for something, and they wouldn't give it to me because I'd already signed papers. And I went on day 4, she come in there and she said, you have to go to your first meeting. And I went to my meeting, and I cried through the whole thing. And because the thing that they talked about was being lonely and being a person that just got caught up in it. And I remember I could talk freely with the people without feeling that I was going to be judged. So I spoke, and then I did my time in rehab, and then it was time for me to go, and I got my first coin, and I carry my coins with me wherever I go today. And I walked out of rehab, and my husband he had come in to talk to the nurses and stuff, and I had to apologize to him, which that's part of your steps. You know that you have to apologize to the people that you love. And he also apologized to me, and I said, you don't have nothing to apologize for. And he said, no. He said, I should have known there was something wrong. And he said, I didn't realize how bad it was until I had to tell him where everything was at, where I hid everything. And he had cleaned the whole house and found all of my stash, and he got rid of it and took it where it needed to be. And he became my number one support. And he would take me to my meetings at home, and he would take me to the places that I needed to go, and he made sure that he protected me when I was nervous about going out, because when you're in rehab, you're in that facility where you're protected. There's nothing there that can harm you. But when you walk out of those doors, that's where the devil tempts you. And he kept tempting me with certain feelings and stuff, but I hung on to 2 scriptures. James 4:7 says, resist the devil and he must flee. I quoted that every morning. And I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. That's Philippians 4:13. Every day I would wake up and I would quote that. And I also did the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Every day, those were my 3 things that I quoted. And before I went to bed at night, I thank God for another day, because I got through that day. And my kids, when I got out, we talked, and they knew there was something wrong, but I apologized to them. And how I got so many drugs, I had to go back to the doctor because I manipulated doctors, because I used to work at the hospital, and I was that girl who wouldn't do that. So years I went and apologized and made right to the people that I did wrong by manipulating them and lying to them. And on year number 4, we had a wonderful pastor at our church. He was doing this is my story, and it was on November 4th. I gave my testimony when I was 4 years clean and sober. And that's when I started speaking out and going to churches and talking about my story. February 6th, which is today, that's why I wanted to do this. I am 11 years clean and sober today with the help of God, with the help of my family. My family is still my biggest supporter. I lost my dad in 2020. I went through a dark spot in life. I didn't think it would ever happen to me, but it happened to me. And our family went through a change, and I was at a dark spot then. And I was tempted. I was tempted to just drink it all away. But I held on to God's never failed me yet, and He gave me a word, grace. And I walked through that grace, and I reached out to my sponsor, and I went back to meetings every 2 or 3 days versus the once a month. And I held on to that I can do this. And then I lost my dad in 2020, and I got to that dark spot again. I didn't want it. Left such a hole in my heart because that was my dad. What was I going to do without my dad? And I got angry, but I still reached out to my sponsor, and I went back to those meetings, and I made it through. And here I am 11 years today talking to the world about my story, my overcoming addiction. I am an addict and alcoholic, but by the grace of God, every day I make it one day at a time. So don't ever think how far you are or whatever you've done in life. You are never too far from God. God cannot. He can rescue you no matter where you're at your darkest hour, at your deepest spot. He will meet you there. I guarantee it, because I'm living proof, and I have a home, and I have family, and I have grandchildren, and I'm alive today because somebody took the time to get me where I needed to go. That is my story. This is my story. 11 years clean and sober. You